you. I hope you can hear me. Let me just check that the microphones are working. Can you hear? Okay. Good. Okay. Well, thank you for your patience. Technology always lets one down, but there we are. Art never lets one down.
Bunlara takılıyor herhalde, değil mi?
My name is Margaret Jack. I'm the country director for the British Council here in Turkey. And I really would very much like to thank you for joining us today here in the Pera Museum auditorium, and indeed the audiences who we hope are joining us in front of their computer screens all over Turkey. We're just thrilled to have you with us for the first talk in the British Council series Writers Meet, and this evening featuring the writers Hanif Kureishi, Muratan Mungan, moderated by Aslı Perker. Just before I continue, I would like to express condolences on behalf of the British Council here in Turkey following the appalling attacks in Ankara and in Diyarbakir over the last 24 hours. Our thoughts are very much with those who were killed and injured, their families, and our thoughts are with the Turkish people. Writers Meet, Yazarlar Buluşuyor, is a new series of literary talks initiated by the British Council to bring together leading literary figures from Turkey and the United Kingdom. This series follows our cultural programme for Turkey in the London Book Fair in 2013. And during that cultural programme, we introduced 50 writers to audiences in Turkey and in the UK. Among the writers whom we introduced to the UK were Muratan Mungan and Aslı Perker, who are with us today. That cultural programme reached over 1.5 million readers and 1,000 literary and publishing professionals. It really was about crossing borders in our literary and creative lives. At the time, Muratan Mungan participated in 3 talks during the London Book Fair back then, and those talks were talking about Istanbul and what it means to be a writer in Turkey. And he told us then that he had a great desire to be in an event with Hanif Kureishi. So I'm delighted that this evening we've made that wish come true, and hugely pleased and thankful to our writers for joining us. A few words, and I know you know these writers very well indeed, but let me just give a little reminder about their achievements. So Muratan Mungan is one of the most prominent and prolific contemporary writers in Turkey, whose works have been translated into 12 languages, including Persian and Norwegian. He is a writer, a poet, an essayist, a screenwriter, a film and theatre critic. And he frequently tells us about his childhood memories in Harita Metod Defteri, his latest book. He's written more than 15 poetry books and writes literary reviews and political articles, in addition to short stories, novels and plays. And his play trilogy, the Mesopotamian trilogy, has enjoyed successful theatre runs across Turkey and has been staged in Italy and Greece. Hanif Kureishi is a prize-winning British writer of Pakistani descent with many novels, plays and screenplays to his name. His work has been translated into 36 languages. And he says, if I may quote, "If you wanted to work in the theatre as I did, it was impossible to escape the argument that culture was inevitably political." In his play Borderline, which was staged by the Royal Court Theatre London in the 1970s, Hanif Kureishi handled the issue of immigrants. And my goodness, this is a major issue in today's world. So very much written ahead of its time. And this play, which took Asian immigrants in Southall in London at its centre, was followed by My Beautiful Laundrette, a screenplay which we know was very much liked in Turkey, And then subsequently among the books by Hanif Kureishi that are translated into Turkish and read avidly by book readers here are The Buddha of Suburbia, The Body, Intimacy, and The Black Album. And the last word. Excellent, excellent, fantastic. Okay, there. Now, Aslı Perker, who is moderating this evening, published her first novel, The Scent of the Others, in 2005, following a successful career in journalism. And her best-selling third novel, Soufflé, has been translated into 23 languages and was actually picked up by Telegram Books at that London book fair for publication in English. We feel we help to be something of a midwife, I would say, for that. Wonderful. And the Daily Mail, popular British newspaper, has called it a funny, moving, clever book which examines the real meaning of family as it explores the true power of food, delicious in every sense. Her latest book, Help Me, was published in the autumn last year. So just to sum up, talks in the Writers' Meet series are taking place, as you can see behind me, in Istanbul, Izmir and Ankara, and they're reaching out to book lovers online through the British Council's YouTube and Vimeo channels. Today's talk is being live streamed, inshallah, on YouTube, and with simultaneous translation, and we are so very committed to making access to the arts available to everybody that it's very important to us that we have also invested in facilities for the hearing impaired, and that will continue throughout the series. So please follow the series through our website and our social media channels. Tell your friends and listen and enjoy. And above all, we're delighted to be collaborating with our long-standing partner, Pera Museum, in our Istanbul talks, and thank our warm friends here for hosting us this evening. So without more ado, I'd like to say a very large thank you to Hanif Kureishi, to Murat Ungan, and Aslı Perker for joining us today for what I'm sure will be a very stimulating exploration of both literary writing and the importance of intellectual expression. So without further ado, I now hand over to Aslı. Thank you.
Is that working?
Çalışmıyor bu.
Oh.
Fatma, it's
Uh,
certainly dead.
Şunları deneyip getirseniz keşke.
I'm picking up Al Jazeera on here. Nothing else.
Ben zaten Türkçe'de tekrarlamak istedim.
Musunuz? Türkçe'de tekrar.
Bu akşam burada çok
Ms. Perker is repeating what she just said. We are here this evening with two prominent writers, Mr. Kureishi and Mr. Mungan. It's an honor for me. I'm extremely nervous. She switched to English. Keşke burada biraz su yerine içki olsaydı. Çok heyecanlıyım bu akşam. Gerçekten titriyorum heyecandan.
So, would you like to start reading with your little excerpts, or okumayla mı başlayalım Murat Han Bey, nasıl ister?
Başlayalım.
Peki.
Let's start with our guest then.
Good. This is a very long essay. Luckily for you, I'm only going to read a little bit of it, 5 minutes of it. This is an essay called Loose Tongues. And I wrote it, it's about speaking. It's about speaking in the family, speaking politically, and speaking to yourself. That exemplary dissident, Oscar Wilde, it's like being in a Jimi Hendrix concert. All I can hear is this incredible feedback.
Ben David Bowie'yi tercih ederim.
Okay.
Probably he would too.
Okay. This is chaos. Why don't we talk first? I think that would be better.
All right. Let's do that. Let's do that.
All I can hear is squealing.
Yes, it's true.
Ama bu problemle karşılaşacağız ama.
But we will be encountering this problem.
We could.
That's okay.
All right. Okay.
Ya
Well,
ama çok güzel bir metindi, keşke.
I wish we could listen to it. Daha sonra
yani biraz sonra zannedersem.
dinlemeyi deneyebiliriz. If we have time left, we will listen to the passage that you selected.
Beheadings. There's a line that says, I think of war photographers who, they say, use the lens to distance themselves from the reality of suffering and death. So now I want to ask to both of you, what is a writer's lens to distance them from the reality of suffering and death? Türkçe'de tekrarlamak isterim Murat Hanım. Okay. So I'm addressing the
Nüans
question to
kaybetmek
both of you.
istemediğim için izliyorum.
Okay.
It's an interesting question because I guess when I was a young man growing up in London in the late 1950s and through the 1960s, I was afraid and I was isolated. I was the son of an Indian immigrant who married my mother, an English woman. I grew up in the suburbs, and I guess it was quite rough down there then. And I was unhappy. But I remember one day at school, I was 14 or 15, looking out of the window, and I can remember the moment when it occurred to me that I should be a writer. And at that moment, I was like somebody who had been saved, because I could see the future. I could see a way out of my family, a way out of the suburbs, and a way out of my circumstances. But I could also see, I guess, some meaning in my experience. So that if I thought about my father, I thought about immigration, I thought about race, I thought about the end of empire, I thought of the position of mixed-raced kids like me who are interested in pop, living in the suburbs, a strange situation for us, coming from a Muslim background, I guess. I thought I could tell stories about this. I can write about this. So, as you say, it might both distance you from the experience that you were living through that was tough, but it would also, I guess, provide meaning and purpose to it. So you turn your life into a narrative, into a story, which has, if you're lucky, it has some meaning and value for you. And the guess then is, if you're a writer, that this story will have some meaning and value for somebody else. So what you're doing is presenting a story which is a link between you and somebody else who might then identify with you, or like you, or enjoy your words, or understand you. So this question has meaning for me really as a young man, and why I suddenly thought I should write all this stuff down and tell other people about what my life is like, that it might interest them. Mostly because I felt really isolated. And also, when you feel isolated, what linked me to the rest of the world were the books that I was reading, the books that I read as a young man. French novelists like Balzac and Proust and so on, American writers like Kerouac and Philip Roth and Norman Mailer and so on. I felt that these writers were speaking to me personally, and I thought if I did this, if I did some writing, I could speak to somebody else personally. And an important link would then be established through writing. So I understand that question, and I think probably as a writer today, I'm still trying to make a link with another person through telling stories.
Thank you. Mr. Mungan, sizin cevabınızı da aynı.
Can we hear from you? Could you please provide an answer to the same question? Do you think, or is there a way to distance yourself from the suffering of death? What is the lens that you're using? Just like a photographer, because we know that there was a quotation from the weddings and sentences. This is the lens of the camera. The photographers at the battlefield see the lens, distancing themselves, keeping themselves away from all the suffering. What do you think is your lens, or what has been the case so far? Well, being a writer or a creative writer, people may have different reasons for being creative or becoming a writer. As we start our path, the point we start is different, and the destination where we make it is different. It is something to be attributed some meaning. But what I can say is that, I mean, as a common ground, the same thing applies to me. You somehow realize you're different. It's like a breakthrough. Up to that time, you've been playing with other kids, and somehow and suddenly you feel yourself different than the other kids. And that difference actually makes you feel isolated and alone, and you also feel the urge to express yourself, and you seek for a language. I don't mean linguistically. It's a style and it's a language. I'm not sure whether this is something painful all the time, but then again, you feel the urge to express it, and it's in a way pain. Pain is less close to me than the urge. Unless you feel hesitant, unless you feel this unsure spirit, no matter where you are on this earth, unless you feel yourself as a foreigner, then you don't feel like expressing yourself, and you do not seek ways and means to decipher or express yourself. So one thing that I always feel, and I always have felt, is that whatever is the basic problem. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me now, Mr. Qureshi? Yep, great. I always try to understand the pain. That's the basic motive, because, trends may change, fashions come and go. The name suggests it's temporary, it's seasonal. Sometimes we go through times that only fake values are taught to people. But then again, my basic perception is dedication, commitment. Unless you commit yourself to it, unless you dedicate yourself, unless you feel this pain to express yourself, even though you become a writer, you wouldn't be able to sustain, because you need to somehow procure fuel. Although being an author or writer is not a profession, well, professions are tasks that may be taught to other people, like being a carpenter. But if you're a creative writer, it's a metaphysical medium or space, I would say. So your pain, your suffering, your crisis of creativity, those are the things that make you a poet or an author. You have an animal inside. You have to tame that animal. You have to feed that animal. You have to create a language and a life. You have to give a life to that animal inside you. So these are the basic concepts that come to mind when you ask this question. Just like Hanif Qureshi, can we talk about a starting point, just like Mr. Qureshi mentioned? Because, he referred to this isolation he felt. He is the son of parents. The mother is British and the father of Indian or Pakistani origin. So he feels the solitude and isolation. That was his starting point, as he just expressed it. Do you have such a starting point, that turning point? Well, maybe that turning point for me, maybe in order to tell about that turning point, I wrote my latest book, Harita Metot Defteri, 400 pages, and I'm still not able to come out of that. We have some similarities, especially in our past, in our background. And as I have just mentioned, that pain and suffering is in itself an isolation. It brings along some eccentricities. Mr. Qureshi may not know it, but I was born in Mardin. This is actually the city and country where this Occidental and Oriental winds crystallize and come together. I mean, the future unfortunately seems gloomy and dark these days, but it's like an equilibrium. It's like a balance you're trying to establish. It's not your own suffering only. I was grown up in a place where 3 languages were spoken. There's the language and the life imposed by the state, and there's also the one on the streets. I was maybe raised in a very rich environment in that respect, but then again that brought along pain and suffering, and that actually brought me the perspective. Maybe you call it the lens. John Berger actually calls it perspective, the way you see it, the way you see and approach a matter. Everyone has a specific perspective. I mean, everyone sees the same thing, or everyone looks at the same thing, but everyone sees something else. You read in between the lines. It's not only on paper that you write something, it's in your mind and it's in concepts. As I rewrote the old fairy tales, that's what I was doing. I mean, fairy tales were written already. Why was I rewriting them? You call it the lens, but maybe it's the lower layers, and with your perspective you fill in the gaps, because I mean you can write 10,000 different versions of Shahrazad, but then again you personalize it. Maybe a commonality between the two of us, or the thing we're looking for, being one, being me, and being an individual. Actually, we are not fashionable people. This is something inherited from the 19th century, and at the same time, literature is like an anarchy. I mean, nothing can come between you and your readers. You have this power. You somehow rebuilt the topic and the concepts in your mind. And in a society just like the Turkish society, where individuals are rather late in becoming individuals, you come along with your iris, with your DNA, with your perspective. I mean, you're unique and you create something. That voice the reader would like to hear in your books. That's what makes you unique.
I want to ask Mr. Qureshi if he agrees that writing is an actually really old-fashioned form of art. Would you agree or disagree?
Old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned, démodé, or
Old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned. Oh, okay.
Speaking's old-fashioned, you might say. Well, storytelling's not old-fashioned. Mm-hmm. People may or may not tire of reading novels, but everybody is aware of stories. You go around anybody's house and they're watching The Sopranos. Everybody's watching The Sopranos everywhere. So whether the story is in the form of a TV box set, or whether it's in the form of a 19th century novel, or however it's presented, the need and desire to tell stories and to hear stories never goes away. You meet somebody, a friend on the street, when you're going to the shop, and you tell them a story. So it seems to me that we need, certainly, as you know, we all know that we are living in an age of let's say, of ideologies. And as you say, writing is a force for anarchy. It breaks things up, and we need more words in the system.
And I believe you have called that it should be a terrorist act almost, right? Writing it, or a writer has to be a terrorist.
Well, I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in the 60s, and
had to be.
I came to some self-knowledge in the 1970s during the period of punk. So I grew up really with the what was called the avant-garde, and with dissidents of the 1960s and attacks on authority. And I'm still, I guess, a child of the 60s. So one of the things Kafka talks about this. He says a book should be an axe that smashes the frozen sea inside us, because we need to speak. We need to communicate with other people. We need more words, and we need new ideas all the time. We need to keep the conversation moving. It's when there is silence that there is terror. So writing, in that sense, for me, is always political, even if it's a writer like Kafka, who you probably wouldn't describe as being, let's say, deliberately political, or a writer like Beckett, or even a writer like T.S. Eliot. They are still artists who are, let's say, disruptive, because they make us think new thoughts.
In that sense, do you ever think that your writing has helped improve any social situations and taboos?
I hope not. Oh.
What about you, Mr. Mungan? Sizin hiç yazdıklarınız sosyal, yani önemli sosyal olayları yıkmış mıdır, tabuları yıkmış mıdır?
Ben
Booze. I believe in accumulation, and I don't think that it's not going to change overnight. It's not going to change anything overnight. But then again, as people arrange their lives, as they name and classify their emotions, as they express what they are going through, or as they seek and find new emotions within themselves, as they develop new perspectives, all of this that we write actually is an accumulation. I had never thought of that. I mean, many things that I'm unable to resolve in human relationship, I'm able to see that my books, my writings make such contribution, but literature is quite lengthy, and it's a process. I mean, people sometimes call this old-fashioned, but I'm not talking about writing being old-fashioned. As an art, it's an old-fashioned art. I mean, it was developed in the 19th century. With postmodernism, it was disrupted, maybe to a certain extent, but then again, it's a style which is formed as such, and at the same time, being old-fashioned is not necessarily bad. We like old-fashioned things, old things, because we go back to it. I mean, we go back to the past, like the 40s and the 50s. We have this retro thing as well. So it's a cycle. It's a time. Well, literature doesn't help you necessarily if you're only focusing on one term or one political trend. It's a longer stretch of things. Time is the first thing, but day-to-day activities, day-to-day needs and requirements and political developments, these are daily and momentarily. I strongly agree with Mr. Qureshi when he refers to Kafka. Everything is transformative. Talking about my work, everything that I write may have political connotations. I mean, from my practice, I can start from my own practice, and I can summarize it as follows. During all these times that I have gone through, many gays and lesbians in their lives started feeling much better, I'm told, as they come out and express themselves, as they recognize themselves, and as they have themselves be recognized. Many gays and lesbians express this. Just a small anecdote I'd like to share with you. I was at a gay club seeing two young men kissing one another. I mean, it was such a beautiful scene. Two handsome men, not only erotic, it was an exchange of love and affection. And you could see it, I mean, the way they touched one another. It was such a beautiful scene that I couldn't stop looking and gazing. And then one of them turned to me and said that, Muratan Bey, the reason why we are so comfortable in kissing one another is thanks to you, they said. I mean, this is one part of it. Back in 1976, hardly anyone was mentioning the Kurdish issue, but I was. I mean, I wrote things that talked about the Kurdish issue. And then it was followed up by a wave, and people started realizing that, well, we can easily talk about it. Why not? This is yet another gain. I mean, such gains, that doesn't make me a hero. I'm not demanding to be classified as a hero, but I know and recognize that I touched these people's lives. I mean, I was able to contribute. I don't want to give many examples and go astray. Well, you've been writing about the Armenian genocide, and you're making talks about this issue, and you are being recognized for that by many, because these are things that people have concerns talking about in a country where people have concerns. It's not because I'm not afraid. I'm telling about this. It's not necessarily because I'm not afraid. I'm not courageous enough, but I get my courage from my concerns and from my concerns. I mean, my whole life is with words. So in a way, I have to be a step forward than others. I mean, I have to put it into words, speaking and talking and normalizing. If you start talking about something, that normalizes it. This is something that we really need these days in this country. You talked about gays and lesbians being or feeling more comfortable and being more... I'm not telling that. I mean, they told me that. I was just, okay, let me tell it. I know that that's the case. So at this very point, I'd like to turn to Mr. Qureshi, because he also would like to talk to you.
Is a reoccurring theme in your works. We know that. Maybe you want to talk about the gay culture in Muslim society, because I think that is the theme in your works, that you usually talk about a Paki boy, a gay Paki boy, mostly busted by an uncle or a father, and then things go their way. So, and I know that you wanted to talk about this with Mr. Mungan.
Well, I guess when I wrote My Beautiful Laundrette, which was in the early 80s, I'd been very immersed at that time in the punk culture of the 70s, but also, probably like you, I've been fascinated by the gay disco culture, also of the 1970s. And many of the punks were fascinated by, indeed, like David Bowie, by dressing up, by transvestism, by personal transformation. So when we got to the mid-1980s and I was writing My Beautiful Laundrette, I was fascinated by the idea of writing a gay Muslim Pakistani film. It seemed to me that the world was waiting for a gay Muslim Pakistani film and hadn't realized that it wanted a gay Pakistani Muslim film. So I wrote this movie about these two, as you were saying earlier, about these two beautiful boys who take their shirts off and they copulate in the back room of a laundrette. And it seemed to me to be a beautiful thing and a very entertaining thing. And I knew, though, that the public was ready for this because of the way the culture was in London. And in those days, you didn't often get to see men kissing in the movies. Now you see men kissing in the movies all the time, but in those days, you never saw men kissing in the movies apart from basically, well, Dirk Bogarde was always kissing men, and Helmut Berger, of course, was kissing men a lot, but neither of them I found particularly attractive, I have to say. So when I wrote My Beautiful Laundrette, I wrote it originally as a heterosexual movie about two friends who were running a laundrette together. And then when I was staying in Pakistan with my family, I was lying in bed and I kept thinking, this movie's not working, it's not working. And I thought, if they kiss, it'll be very beautiful, and then the movie will make sense, it'll work. So it was, for me, it was a practical thing, but also it shocked me when they kissed, because I thought, I haven't seen much kissing between men in the movies, and there should be more of it. And when you see the movie, the word gay or homosexual was never mentioned in the movie. They just suddenly kiss. And it seemed really shocking to me, and it's still, when you see the movie, it still looks shocking and very beautiful. So in that sense, one of the things that we do as writers, I guess, is try and introduce new subjects into the cinema, into literature, into our work, that everybody knows about, that the public is already perfectly aware of, but you just, as a writer, you drop the subject into the culture, and it becomes, as he says, it becomes a normal part of the culture.
But in that sense, I wanna
Ben
add
bir şey
something.
eklemek istiyorum.
Before you add something, because it actually this involves you, when the uncle comes into the room where Omar and his boyfriend are kissing, more than kissing, he reacts a bit, but then there's not much fuss about it. Whereas I think Mr. Mungan had a boyfriend back in Mardin when he was in high school, and then when the parents found out about it, they sent him away. So I think being controversial in United Kingdom, in Europe, is different than being controversial in this part of the world.
You will listen to the UK from Mr. Qureshi, I suppose, and Turkey from me. Is that the case? Well, being controversial, I mean, controversial is... I mean, it's the easy way out, you know. I mean, you see a scene, two young men kissing one another. The uncle comes in, sees it, and makes a little fuss about it, and then it's by and gone. But when we think about Turkey, your family, having learned that you have a boyfriend, sends your parents sent you away. That was the thing. So my point is, belki Bay Qureshi o kadar çok bunu çatışmalı.
Would be even more controversial if you lived on that part of the world, in that part of the world. There's always a difference between the East and the West and writing.
Böyle bir durum söz konusu. Farklılık. Maybe the first common memory that we have, Mr. Qureshi, was during Istanbul Film Festival. Can you hear me now? Okay, he's taking it from the beginning again. The answer to this question of yours, well, I wasn't aware of it, but many years ago at the Istanbul Film Festival, I was watching the movie My Beautiful Laundrette, and that was the first memory with Mr. Qureshi. This is going to be the answer to your question, because right in front of me, well, I mean, we had a very important author whom we lost quite recently, and then I was seated right behind him, and that scene came. I mean, we were watching that very scene. That old author, actually, he was a leftist. He was he was in opposition. He was a Democrat. He was a fan of Atatürk, but he couldn't stand it. He just stood up and left the cinema as that scene came. I don't know. I mean, to what extent this would be similar to the reaction of conservatives in the UK, but I really like this. This is what I mean by normalization. It's impossible to tell about such a story without dramatizing it. Ahmet Yilmaz is a recent case in Turkey. Mr. Qureshi wouldn't know this. The father actually assassinated his very son after learning that his son is gay, and then he fled to Syria. This would never ever happen in any part of Europe or the UK. Actually, the hard conditions and the difficult conditions in a society actually determine what you write about and how you write about it. For instance, in the movie, My Beautiful Laundrette, that scene was not in the form of a propaganda. It was not dramatizing it. It was not judging it. It was a simple part of life. And that really made me feel good. I mean, I'm thankful for that scene, specifically for that scene. But for years in Turkey, we have been struggling with people just like the guy that I was telling you, not only with the murderer fathers, but especially in the 70s, during those times. There was this Velvet Goldmine, the punk culture and everything. That movie, the glam rock, when glam rock emerged, that soft transition was something pleasant. But we had a fight here. We had to fight for it. This country, this geography have their own reality. You lose things, you earn things, you win things. I mean, the tone is different. There was this hammam in one of my books where gays met. Actually, that story is a bitter one. I would love to write about a pleasant scene, you know, a comfortable and soft and pleasant scene in my books, but I'm not able to. Let me ask this. Did you ever dream that you wrote in a Western country, and what happened to you? Did you feel more liberated? Do you think you would be freer writing in another country? Or in another culture? No, I mean, I'm not drawing such conclusions. I don't like to start with such conclusions. I mean, I'm the product of this geography, and that's it. I mean, after that, it's all about probabilities, and it's about drawing conclusions, but it wouldn't take you anywhere. But then again, you are a universal author, and you speak to many, and at the same time, I know that there was this interesting thing in Germany, as far as I know. The poet's novel, they wanted to translate the book, but then again, they didn't find you rather authentic, or what? I'm going to tell, but I don't want to I don't want to talk too much if Mr. Qureshi is going to answer that. Okay, ilginç olduğuna inanıyorum. Buyurun. There's this interesting thing that attracts my attention, and it's going to actually provide an answer to your question. Mr. Qureshi is from the Western literature, and I'm a product of the Oriental literature, Eastern literature. It's not the tone of the writing that we have. It's something related to the tradition literature you come from. I also tried to give this example over dinner last night. People who attended my talks would know this, as we are seated here at the same time. I mean, we're contemporaries, we live in the same times. Of course, I'm knowledgeable about Mr. Qureshi, but he doesn't know me much. That's why he's learning. We can multiply that, we can enrich that. Any writer who is at the same time a good reader may count 15 names from the French literature and 15 British writers. No matter what the quality of the work is, still the work is different. I mean, we have this great wedge or this great distance. Let's say a book of mine is translated in English and published in the UK. If a reader likes my work and an author likes my work, without knowing the figures and my background and my past, will be confronted with me, will be introduced to me. But then again, I have this deep perspective. I mean, I have this great knowledge of German literature, French literature. I mean, these have been long translated into Turkish. So there is this great wedge or distance. So how are we going to become universal here? That's the first thing. And number two, I write in Turkish. Turkish is not that frequently spoken as a language. And there's this example I always give. For instance, a French author in any country, say, is translated into Portuguese. He has the luxury to select one translator among 30 good translators, but for Turkish and English, just imagine, let's say there are only 5 translators who would be able to translate me from Turkish to English, and then I have to have this bonding, I have to have the energy. So we are like a literature, we're the representatives of a literature which is actually numb and which may not speak. The most difficult thing. I always thought that finding a lover is the hardest thing, but finding a translator is even more difficult. And just imagine, I mean, we need, just like the sailors, we need translators on every shore. We have, I mean, there's this wedge. We cannot have access to one another. And let me come to the answer of your question. I'm going to read out passage. This is actually, in a way, the summary of my relationship with literature. This is from my book. It is a fantasy. It actually is on a different planet, the poet's novel. Religion is replaced with poetry, and it was a fantastic novel. A big publishing house in Germany was very much interested in this book of mine, and we sent 4 chapters in English, and we were waiting for the response. And this was actually a publishing house that I really confided in. The editor actually sent me a note saying that we really loved the book, but in Germany, German readers don't expect to read such a book when we talk about Turkish literature. They have different expectations. What's the expectation from a Turkish author? That expectation I'm not aware of. I don't know what the expectation of readers are. Is that the case? Is that the case why we have a mosque and a woman wearing a turban on the book cover of every Turkish book which is translated into other languages? So I actually responded back saying that if they really like the book, then I'm fine. Publish it with the name Robert Smith rather than Murat Mungan. That's fine with me, I said. Maybe if you publish my book with my pseudonym as Robert Smith. As you know, Robert Smith is the singer of The Cure, the band Cure, and we were born on the same day, 21st of April, so it wouldn't be a total stranger, Robert Smith. So now, with your permission, I'd like to read a brief part from my book, the poet's novel. We must start at the very beginning, said Muta. With earth, in a single moment, his rich, pure voice had filled the entire courtyard. The audience for a time had been silently exchanging looks with him. And the moment he opened his mouth, they were spared to him with their entire attention. Both of them were made of earth, he went on. Poetry and pottery, they were made from earth. Later they were fed with fire, water and air. Collapsing civilizations always leave 2 things behind, poetry and pottery, the oldest witnesses of the planet. In his voice the words took on shape, substance, seemed to hang and gather in the air, and as if waiting for everyone to comprehend, delayed before dispersing. In this first talk before an audience after so many years, says Muta, he wants to refresh the memory with primal basic knowledge, and therefore has chosen to start with earth. He mentions that as we learn more and more, there's an embarrassment about repeating the first basic matters, and that because this core knowledge is held in abeyance, it is with time totally forgotten. So today's talk will be a spare one. I will make it as spare as possible. Some seasons come in a day. Listen to me with the feelings you might have on the first morning of an autumn which has suddenly arrived after being delayed. Like most of those sitting in the courtyard, Zey Tagan had begun with great seriousness, jotting down what Mota said in small notebooks on their laps. In the remainder of the talk, Mota gives examples of to stress that, like pottery, poetry is made from the soil of homeland, but that, like pottery, it should be of use in other lands, everywhere on the continent and planet. The feet of the poet should press firmly on the soil from which he springs, while he should be able to say his words to the whole planet. The fact that some flowers owe their existence to the climate in which they grow, of course, does not lessen their beauty. But their existence is diminished if they can't live in other climates. And it's not enough for a good poem if it is only can be read in its own land. A good poem should have the power to convert into other climates the climate of the land where it was born. Poetry is the voice and smell of the place from whence it comes. Its own sun, its own wind, its own rain, it carries them everywhere, and it becomes the sun, wind and rain of the place it goes to. Just like a pot, a good poem should be able to carry the earth that formed it to other lands where it can be used. In the spareness of the everyday, don't forget, a poem is a useful thing, as useful as furniture or belongings. This, in summary, is my understanding of arts and literature. Even though I'm making pottery out of the earth of this country, no matter where, my books should touch the lives of readers in Canada, in America, the Eskimos. Then I would feel as a universal author. Otherwise, I would be confined in my own geography, and I would have to suffice in addressing the Turkish readers only. Ben bir şey söylemek istiyorum.
Interested in what you're saying about art being useful, because I've always insisted that the useful thing about art is that it's useless. But there is another sense, a real sense in which it's useful for people. And I think when we sit down to write, I think when many writers sit down to write, you sit there and you immediately feel depressed because you think this is pointless. Nobody wants this. Why would they want this? Why am I doing this? When I sit in my room, I look out of the window, I can see people in the morning going to work with their briefcases. They look very busy. They're hurrying to school and they're hurrying to catch the bus and etc., etc. And I sit in my room and I think, well, now I've got to write a novel. And it doesn't seem important compared to the men who are collecting the garbage, the nurses who are going to the hospital. And then suddenly I thought what you said was really moving and interesting, because we are not useless, actually, because one of the things that we as artists do is help make a culture. And whether you are a modernist like Beckett or Kafka, the culture is still in opposition to the let's say to the authority, or to the very interesting thing you talked about earlier when you were talking about being a gay writer, against the idea of normalization. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, the most normal thing in the world was to be a white man, you know, and the white men, they ruled the empire. And when my father came to Britain, we Indians and so-called Asians, we were considered to be inferior, because the white man was the normal thing. The white man was the standard of what it was to be a regular human being. The white man was the master race. Since then, we've managed to erode this idea of the white man, and one of the ways in which we erode this is through ideas, and through the conversation and education that comes out of ideas. So you have convinced me this evening that art is not entirely useless, and I'm rather impressed by that.
You know,
Çok sağ olun.
on that note, I have asked before
Pardon.
that do you ever think that your writing has helped improve any social situations and taboos, and you said no. So this has changed.
Well, I changed my mind in
Yes,
the last
okay,
10
all
minutes.
right. Oh, beautiful.
I've changed my mind in the last 10 minutes, because
I knew you would.
I would hate to flatter myself to think that I was doing anything useful. I think that it would be the vanity of a writer to think he or she was doing something really, really useful. But now I have changed my mind, and I am now convinced that being an artist is the most important thing in the world.
Bir şey eklemek isterim.
Lütfen, buyurun.
Bu beyaz adam, siyah adam denklemi.
Black man concept. As a country, we are suffering from something which is the East and the West. The East and the West issue. We didn't used to call ourselves the East. West used to call us the East. So our own definition is figured according to the West. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, sir, Mr. Qureshi? Can you hear the interpreter? Can you hear me, sir? Okay.
Sözün kısası ne kadar yaz.
So in brief, the more you write, communication is an issue. No matter how much you write, communication may still be an issue. That's the bottom line. Anyway, the West, we have become an Eastern country because the West calls us the East, because the West actually describes the whole world according to its own perspective. So we're like the American Indians. We live like the American Indians, and of course the cultural and literary dimensions become as such. This German example I have just given, I mean the example from Germany, I have some other incidents actually I can tell about. For instance, I mean, this is a brief anecdote. 40 rooms, in my book, 40 rooms, there was a reference made to a movie. A European critic said, "I'm really startled. How come you know the movie?" he said. And I asked back this critic, "Are you able to ask the same question to a French or an Italian writer?" This East and West, this clash between the East and the West, or this deadlock between the East and the West. Actually, Western markets is seen by some writers as a marketplace. We have some talented writers. Actually, these writers harm themselves, harm their literature by doing so. Similarly, there's something I mentioned, this Western literature and the Eastern literature. There's this historical wedge or gap between the two. I actually do something in my literary work, if I can talk about it, roughly speaking. Stories are made in the West, stories are told in the East. In my books, Shahrazad, 1001 Nights, Aladdin's Magical Lamp, and you know, Maupassants are the ancestors of stories. John Steinbeck came later, and then Raymond Carver, the most recent one. That writing stories, there's a field, the players are placed on that field, and the perception is presented to the readers. I mean, there's a configuration. It's in a way a technological engineering thing. But on my behalf, I can still say that I'm still trying to tell the following in my own culture and country. The configuration made in the East, in the Western literature, and the fairy tales and storytelling in the East. I'm trying to make a synthesis of the two as much as I can. When you try to evaluate me, assess me, or criticize me with this, you cannot do that with your criteria, because you have to have my perspective if you are to make an evaluation of my work. When we now come back to this analogy of lenses you asked about, it's not only the lenses of the writer that matter, it's also the lens that the reader has. Because, I mean, we have to know what the measures of the readers are. Because people don't read the books with their eyes only. They read the books with all that life behind them, and the life they are living, and the things they have read before. As Qureshi mentions, one of the useful, maybe he said, I mean, he didn't see this useful, but we, good writers, good authors, we actually learn from one another, especially from superior ones, how to be a better writer. For instance, Senar actually taught me a lot, I mean, did a lot for me. All the good authors before myself, I always see them as my ancestors. I don't know whether Qureshi will agree, but when I write, I sometimes have this feeling, I wish this author were alive and would read this chapter of mine. Not only to, you know, pass my load on to them, but also, I mean, this is in a way a part of our tradition, and it's like a habit. An author, actually, an author always takes family photos with previous authors in his life. For instance, I always feel naked in Germany. Totally naked. It's difficult because they don't know me. I mean, I can go all the way back to Schiller and Goethe. I know about the German authors and poets and everything, but they don't know the whole thing behind me. Independent from what I'm telling as stories, I'm going to ask you that, but there's this thing. For both of you, there's this thing. Different forms, you have different forms that you use as you write. Both of you have movies, both of you, we all have a big appetite. You have screenplays and you have theater plays and also screenwriting. How do you decide on the form, which work will have which form? I really wonder about this as a writer myself. On my behalf, I can say that, well, it's the material that tells me. Don't put me in the form of a novel. I'm only 100 meters runner. I'm not going to run for 1,000 meters. Sometimes the material says. So, is there jealousy in between, like the writer Murat Mungan and the poet Murat Mungan? No, I'm only jealous of my lovers. What about you, Mr. Qureshi?
Do you want to use when you have a subject and then when probably you're excited about it, you want to write about it?
Well, the truth is, as you say quite correctly, in the end, it's the material speaks to you in a particular way and tells you. But I choose whether I'm going to write a movie or a novel or a story, really, depending on whether I need the money. Because I have spent my life as a professional writer, and I am half a writer and I'm half a businessman, and I have 3 children. And I remember one time a few years ago sitting in my house, and I have 3 children at school and I have to pay their fees, and I was sitting there and I was writing a short story. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? I can't afford to write a short story. This is a madness. To support these kids, it's really expensive, and you write a short story in England and you publish it in a newspaper, and if you're lucky you get paid I don't know, £150 or £200 or whatever. And it might take you a few weeks to write a story. And I thought, I'm going to go crazy because unless I find another way of making a living, I'm going to have to become a respectable person, and I'm going to have to get a proper job, like a journalist. And or a professor. And who could think of anything worse than being a professor at a university? So I
teach. Is that the reason
and
that
I am
you teach?
a professor at a university.
Yes.
And so sometimes I write movies, and I write movies. Actually, I love writing movies. I really enjoy writing movies. But the truth is, if you're a professional writer, you spend. I certainly have to spend a good deal of my time thinking about how I'm going to make a living. And when I was young, I thought that I would write movies because you can write movies relatively quickly, and you get better money for them than you do for writing stories or essays or indeed novels as well. So, you know, we are professionals as well as artists, and we live in a world where we have to negotiate all the time. It seems amazing to me now. I am 60 years old now, and I've made a living as a writer since I was 25. And it seems amazing to me now when I look back that I've actually made a living as a professional writer for so long. It's the only thing that I wanted to do, which was to be a professional writer. Not only to be an artist, but actually to make a living for my family out of writing, which is a very tough thing to do. And I inherited that sense, I guess, from my dad, you know, from my father, the idea you couldn't just sit in a room, you know, dreaming up a poem, that you had to, you know, be a man in the world who supported his or her own family. So I like to write short stories, I love to write essays, I love to write novels, but I also have to do other things in order to survive as a writer. And if you want to think about, you know, why we do what we do, it's the same reason that anybody else goes to work. You know, that we are also professionals as well as artists. But I would also be very interested to take questions from the audience. I'd be
Mr.
interested to
Mungan
know
wants
what
to
they
add
have to
one
think.
more thing on this issue, and then we'll move to maybe one more question from me, but then first, Mr. Mungan.
Being an author in the East and West, I can say that no matter how many short stories you write, we still don't earn £150, actually. We don't even have that in Turkey. An example from the United States. Actually, it is the authors are the ones, and societies have such structures. If you're Harold Robbins in US writing bestsellers and romantic novels, you may have private jets and you may have yachts. If that's what you're going for, what you're running after, you use your talent for that. I mean, but Susan Sontag is not suffering. She is also earning her living as well. Well, if that were the case in Turkey, that would be something else. Unfortunately, other people's talents and money, capabilities, like you need certain things like cinema and theater. These are collective works. Unfortunately, Turkey is not a fortunate country. I went into cinema for some time. I then ran away without taking a second look. Theater is a different thing. I don't want to go into that. Now, I mean, on my behalf, I sometimes say that there's this thing which should be on stage. If I don't get that feeling, I would never ever write, because theater is like a poverty, art of poverty, because it's a space. I mean, it's three-dimensional. When you make it a movie, it won't work out. It won't work out. So, writing a text, rather than writing a play, I really like to contribute to the language, not to the repertoire necessarily. Parallel to what you just mentioned, I mean, this is what came to my mind. You said that, Mr. Qureshi said that he is rather interested in something, being a writer in Turkey. How does it feel, or what kind of a thing? If he's still interested, I can talk about that a bit. Actually, being a writer in Turkey, not only being a writer in Turkey, being something in Turkey is difficult. Indeed, difficult. First of all, it's very difficult to be authentic. It's very difficult to be yourself. It's challenging. The structures are closed, and you try to describe yourself. You try to be, and it's very difficult, because they don't let you be. We are nearly the same age as Mr. Qureshi, and he always gives this example about the conditions surrounding us. 1960 was when there was the military coup in Turkey. 1970, there was yet another military coup. I was at the age of 25 when there was yet another coup d'etat in 1980. So all my youth years actually were spent with military coups. Books were burned down, and there was curfew. And just imagine you grow up and try to become an author, and then you see people burying their books secretly so that their books are not seized by the military. I would love to spend time at the disco. My father is a lawyer. He's a man of law, and I actually entered the university entrance exam and earned the right to study law. He actually was cross with me for 1 year. He always wanted to see me as a lawyer. But I always wanted to be a writer. And he said that being a writer means spending your life in prison. Kemal Tahir, Yaşar Kemal, Orhan Kemal, Nazım Hikmet, all the writers have been hosted in prison in this country. Translators have been tried and imprisoned. Sometimes they killed the writers. Sometimes they sent them into exile. Just imagine, you will have to survive with your words, with your work. You will resist and you will survive. Just imagine that hesitance and those question marks I always had, but still I continued. I now realize death, there was actually a question I really wanted to ask you, and you somehow touched upon this. You mentioned your dads in your responses. Well, that is a question unanswered. Mr. Qureshi, I know that...
Dead, and then you have a book after he passed away. You wrote a book after he passed away, and then you were depressed for quite a while after he passed away. It surprises me because I might think you have a conflicting relationship with your father. And then I know that Mr. Mungan, sizde or
İngilizce devam
Mr. Mungan also said once, I think, he would have liked to talk to his dad, who had passed away, as an older man. So my last question would be, what would you say to your fathers if you were able to speak to them right now? Maybe one sentence.
Well, my father was wanted to be a writer. He was a failure as a writer, but he carried on writing. And I remember once as a young man, I said to him, why do you continue to write, Dad? Why do you carry on like this? Because he would get up very early in the morning, and in the house where we lived, you would hear this huge hammering from his typewriter. And in those days, the typewriters were very big, and it sort of vibrated through the house. And he said this wonderful thing to me. He said, I carry on writing, although I'm not published, he said, because I want to be an example to you of somebody who persists. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing to say. And I guess you might say that although I had, as you put it, a conflicted relationship with my father, and of course there isn't anybody in this room who doesn't have a conflicted relationship with their parents, I thought that that was a very beautiful idea, that as an artist you continue to work, you carry on, and that is your dignity or your nobility insofar as you have any.
I think everything that I would tell my father, I wrote about it all in my most recent book. After a certain point, when you no longer have the chance to utter those words, you shouldn't wear out yourself. What would I say? Let's go have some rakı tonight, I would say.
But I really want to ask these questions, so please feel free to ask questions that you have now.
Fatma has a microphone over there, so...
I do. Thank you very much for pointing out.
Mr. Qureshi, do you still want to read the work you have brought with you?
No, I'm too tired. I would rather listen to the audience as well.
So first, Ses.
Okay, we have only time for 5 questions, by the way, so get in line.
Ses.
Be fast.
Tamam. Okay. First question.
Okay.
It's not a question. It's just, I'm just curious. As you are talking about your father, in fact, this was one of the questions, Hanif Qureshi, I had in mind. I think that's my favorite book. And I think that's your Oedipus book too. I'm just curious, have you thought of publishing your father's manuscript? Because I was fascinated, for example, by V.S. Naipaul's relationship, with his father. And then he honored his father by publishing Gurudeva.
I wrote a book called My Ear at His Heart. I'm not sure if it's published in Turkish or not. I don't think it is. Anyway, it was about me. I found in my father's house, and indeed in my own house, many manuscripts written by my dad, and I read these, and it was very moving and beautiful for me, because they were stories of my father's childhood in India. And suddenly there was his mom, there was his dad, there were his brothers, he was going to school, and suddenly it was like finding a movie, a home movie of your father's life. It was amazing for me to read these books. And I read them, and I wrote about the experience of reading this stuff, and of, as it were, refinding my father, and having a new conversation with my father, as you were saying, when you're older, long after he's dead. And obviously, You know, you think about your parents long after they're dead, and you think about them, you know, in a new way every day. You have a new conversation with them. You know, one of my sons said to me the other day, he said, "God, Dad," he said, "I wish you were dead." I said, even if I were dead, I wouldn't go away. I would still haunt you, and even when I am dead, I'm going to haunt you. And it'll be horrible for you when you're 90 years old. You'll still be thinking about me. So writing a book about your father is a way, as we talked at the beginning of the conversation, a way of making your parents go away, but also a way of you bringing yourself closer to them.
Thank you. A question for you both. If you couldn't write for whatever reason, what would you do?
Well, yes, I think if you're a writer, you really are a writer, and it's really really an obsession. Actually, I have many friends who are painters, who are musicians, directors, movie directors, and so on. You know, and they are, I don't know, in their late 60s, they're in their 70s, they're in their 80s. And they just carry on working. And some of them are rich, or some of them are sick, or whatever. And you think, well, why don't you just sit at home and read the paper and watch the TV? You know, but they don't want to. We all, as artists, want to carry on being artists. It's a really good job to be an artist. It's fantastic to spend your life writing stuff down and drawing pictures and so on. I would recommend it to my kids. I would recommend it to anyone else. It's a really fulfilling thing to do, but you get very obsessive about it, you know, and you really don't want to stop doing it. You know, sometimes I think I'm going to retire now, and then I retire for about half an hour, and I walk around the house, and I look out of the window, and then I think, well, what am I going to do now? And then I think, oh, I've got a really great idea for a movie. And then I start to write it down. So I think most artists are born rather than made, because in that sense it's like a terrible obsession. You really want to do it more, and you really enjoy doing it, and there's something you haven't quite got, and something you really want to say, etc. So it's a wonderful and terrible job.
I can actually divide myself into two before I answer this question. If the poet inside me dies, I'll quit. Some decisions that we make, are not necessarily related to our lives. You draw lessons from bad examples before you. Regarding Turkish literature, unfortunately, I drew lessons from bad examples rather than good examples. God, please keep me away from becoming such a writer. I always say that's why I have the breaks. But poetry is something serious in that sense, because poetry is actually the work of times during which your heart is still a child and your brain is an adult. If you're not able to carry it any longer, you have to quit. That obsession Qureshi mentioned is something close to my heart. I really feel the urge. I have to write it. It's not my concern. I'm not concerned whether I'm no longer going to write. My concern is what else can I do to refresh myself. There is so much more to do. How will I find the time and opportunity? Being an author is in a way a lifelong student position. I know people, sometimes they're painters, but they like the idea of being a painter. They'd like to be a celebrity. They'd like to have a couple of pictures sold. The same rule applies to directors. The same rule applies to actors and actresses. I can give many examples. Being is what matters to me, no matter what. Being myself. I mean, if I'm able to say that this is a good book, I believe in this book, I believe in this novel, and if I put everything into it, then that's what matters. I mean, say I really worked hard, but still it didn't work out, the first thing that you will do is make me wear a reverse jacket and put me in an insane, madhouse. I mean, I'm never fed up because it's my boredom that urges me to continue to write. Well, when the question was asked to you, how you started writing, one of you said that solitude and isolation triggered it, and you, Mr. Mungan, said that it was the pain and the suffering. Does writing somehow stop the suffering, and does writing help you get rid of the isolation? Is it a remedy? I'll have a brief answer. In the long term, it doesn't bring any good, but in the short term, yes, it's very much useful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that because I feel that in the end, the only cure for loneliness is to really be with another person, a real other person. You know, but writing is a good way of being with yourself without going mad, because when you're writing, you at least are imagining that there is another person who you are telling the story for, and so your thoughts are not just going around in the normal anxious, crazy way on a loop, as they are when you're going mad by yourself in your kitchen. When you're writing, it's as though you're writing a letter which is meant for somebody else who is real, who is there, and that really organizes your thoughts, and it also makes you aware that you're living in a real world of other people, which is really important not to forget when you're a writer, because when you're a writer, it is often possible that you could go mad because you forget that there is a real world of other people outside there.
We'd like to thank both of you. Writers come together with the editors and the translators, and writers get to know the translators once their works are being translated. Sometimes this is face-to-face. This is not necessarily the case when it's the translation work. My question is about the editors and translators. Do you see editors and translators as artists that contribute to your work?
I would hope that the translator was not too much of an artist, I would have to say, actually. I would hope that the artist was the artist in the translator was suppressed, that the translator would do his or her best to render what I've written as truly as he or she can. But an editor is different. An editor can be much more creative and should be more bold in terms of the decisions they might want to make about your work. They might suggest something that's really bold. I have an editor at Faber, Walter, who looks after me sometimes, and sometimes I look at the manuscripts which I've given to him, and he's put big lines across it like that, and then I turn the next page, there's another big line across it like that, and then very slowly I turn the next page and I look and there's another line across it. And it's maddening, it makes you crazy. And you really then have to think about why he's put a big line across it like that. So an editor, whether there's any sense to him putting a big line across it like that. And it's really worth thinking about. A translator, it's a different job. And you don't, and a writer doesn't work with a translator. You give them your book, and then you say bye-bye, and then your book turns up in another country if you're lucky.
When it comes to translation, I think the words that I have just uttered worked fine. My understanding of a translator is that we have to have the same blood type. We have to make sure that the translator grasps the meanings of concepts in your life. So, in a way, the translator is rebuilding me. So I see this in Turkey quite often. Sometimes I see 4 or 5 different authors being translated by exactly the same translator. Especially for poetry, this is a suicide. And some authors are quite fortunate about translation, because sometimes you come across with different things. I'd like to tell about an anecdote. 2 authors, one is a French author, the other one a German author. They meet in Vienna at some stage. One is translating the other one's book. As a Turkish writer, I'm unable to do that. That happened only once. Petros Markaris was the one who turned my book into a play. I felt myself like Sophocles. He knows Ottoman Turkish, he knows about ancient Turkish, he knows my world, so he was very much able to translate my book into Greek. Chador did that as well, but this is not possible in all countries, because this author that this translator that I mentioned is originally from Istanbul, Constantinopolis, and from the Princess Islands, Halkidiki. Well, it's quite a fortune. It's a bit of a fortune if you are soulmates with your translator. Margaret Duran's book, Blue Eyes, Black Hair. Peter Hunt was translating that. Just imagine, Palese translated Virginia Woolf into Italian. I mean, they start the game with 1-0. I mean, they are winning the game. I know Qureshi is very much interested into soccer, so he would like this analogy, I suppose, starting the game 1-0. Margaret said that I actually talked about this gay sensibility rather in a closed manner. How did you do that? Rather with implications, like the implication of an eruption. Peter Hanke, the author, said that that was not my understanding. I didn't take it that way. Just imagine, I mean, he translates the whole book without getting that implication. The author says that I implied many things. I mean, that's hopeless. And this is what translation is. But when it comes to editing, when working with editors, since 1992, I've been working with the same editor. Our relationship has long become a Catholic marriage. Within these years, we gained so much distance, and we've been sharing so much with one another. I can only guess about the UK. I know about the situation in Germany. I've been coming and going for years. One of the challenges we have in Turkey is about editors. Back in 1970s, we were short of paper, and we wouldn't be able to publish books unless you're a celebrity. You would be hopeless about publishing your book. Many authors, many potential authors, just gave up because they couldn't find the means. Turkey is a graveyard of talents. I don't know any other country that buries so many talents. Many people had to stop and quit in middle way. And now we have plenty of paper these days. And we have so many publishing houses, and we have so many authors that write. But when I take a look at these books, most of them, I don't know how to put it, but even though they are talented, apparently they have not received that necessary editing or editors' notes and editors' recommendations. Editors should give you measures and criteria. One of the things that I attach great importance to is about interpretation of concepts. I always try to consider that, so that I don't lose time, and I don't have the readers lose time. Editors, a good editor is a second pair of eyes. I don't know whether this will attract your attention, but I, most of the time, have people from specific professions, if those professions are mentioned in my book. High Heels was a book of mine. It was about women. I actually had 10 people read my scripts. I, most of the time, have 10 people read my manuscripts before I convert it into a book. I had a psychiatrist, a friend of mine, a lady, and an actress. two women. Maybe I miss certain points, but they are so cruel with their attention. No, Muratan, that woman wouldn't wear that skirt. No, that woman wouldn't wear those earrings, they may say. So it's in a way confirmation of what I write. I do this in a professional way as well. A good friend of yours may do that. A good editor would do that. As I wrote my play, The Kitchen, the scene was a small restaurant operated by 6 women. I actually had 2 women operating a restaurant. I always work. I work on the cooking, and I always make research because I can also make mistakes. So primarily, I think that you have to be open to the outside world. Your editor is a close mate that shares secrets with you. For instance, in one of my books, there were too many aunts, and it was somehow lingering in my mind. I always take it to my editor, and the editor, after reading that chapter, said that the second aunt, he said, okay, fine, we are omitting that scene altogether. So, that scene may be a good one, or that chapter may be a good one, but sometimes some of the material that you use may be confusing. So I just got rid of that 4 pages. Keep those 4 pages. Maybe you'll write something else about that, but you have to let it go. When you have someone else read the manuscripts, I try to keep silent. I never make comments. I just leave it to the person so that that person, when making a comment, actually points out certain things. Well, the thing that will kill you is I'm done. I'm finished. Once my book is published, I wouldn't tolerate a single comment. But until then, I'm open to comments and criticisms. Who will be asking the next question? Would you please speak up? This is in English. Ben Sayın Kureyşi'ye sormak istiyorum.
Read any piece of Turkish literature and your opinion on it. And my second question will be, you as a reader, how do you find the literature in translation? Are you aware that it's too underrated and it's not published very much?
To my shame, I can't say that I've read much Turkish literature, but I have most of my education in literature. It was all in translation. All the Russian novels I read, Gogol, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. Actually, they were all translated by the same person, and we all read the same. They were all translated by a woman called Constance Garnett. And people used to make jokes that all of Russian literature was written by Constance Garnett, because she kind of determined how you read Gogol, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and so on, because her style, of course, was the same in Dostoevsky as it was in Gogol, and they seem very similar to me. But of course, without translators, I would never have read Greek literature or Russian literature or Czech literature or whatever. So without translators and translation, we will have no knowledge, because we can't. It would be impossible for us to learn so many languages. It would be impossible for us to have any knowledge at all of world literature.
Bir şey eklemek istiyorum.
Make an additional comment. In 1930s, Russian literature, when Russian literature or literary works were translated into Turkish, if you can find those copies, you will see some footnotes saying, I actually keep a couple of examples as a part of my collection. The translator of a Dostoevsky novel made a footnote. The translator here omitted 30 pages that would confuse the reader. Can you hear me now? You missed the joke, I'm sorry. Espriyi kaçırdım, bir daha tekrarlar mısınız diyor. Kulaklığı bozulmuştu.
Bugün kulak.
Today is the day of the headsets. Okay, he's saying that the Turkish back in 1930s in Turkey, when the Russian classics were translated into Turkish, some books, some Russian novels had some footnotes. This example I'm going to give is from a Dostoevsky novel. The footnote went as follows. Here, the translator decided that there were some unnecessary details during these 30 pages, so the translator took the liberty to omit them. 30 pages. Unfortunately, this is about it. Kesinlikle çok büyük bir memnuniyetti. Birlikte olmak harikaydı. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Geldiğiniz için hepinize teşekkür ediyoruz.
Right?